right, so we are out here in View Royal for Island Sound and Story, and today we're talking to Kyle from the Peninsula Streams Society about some of the restoration work that they're doing right here in the park, bringing back some of that marshland, that swampy area, particularly after 100 years of houses being around here, a lot of geese, Canada geese coming in here and causing problems. So why don't you introduce yourself, introduce Peninsula Streams, and tell people a little bit about what we're doing in this location.
Sure. My name is Kyle Armstrong. I'm the Executive Director of Peninsula Streams Society and lead on this project of salt marsh restoration in View Royal Park. Peninsula Streams Society is a local environmental charity with about 20 years history working on the Saanich Peninsula in Greater Victoria. We partner with a number of different First Nations, local governments, community stewardship groups, and try to deliver ecological restoration projects, environmental stewardship opportunities, as well as environmental education for local schools and adults.
Yeah, and so you have a number of sites that are a little bit like this one, right? And can you tell us what you're kind of doing here and where all you have been doing it?
Sure. So here in Greater Victoria, in the capital region, our salt marshes, much like the rest of the Georgia Depression and the Salish Sea, are under threat from things like development. Historically, salt marshes are opportune places for things like logging, development, farming, really productive soils, calm waters, seas, but they're also these really productive and biodiverse areas. So we've really targeted our efforts in this urban area to try to protect and restore what we have left of these really important systems, as well as try to learn a little bit about how we can best restore and protect them into the future.
Yeah, and so what have you learned from this site specifically with what you've been doing here?
Sure. One of the impacts or stressors for these systems that we're trying to address is the overgrazing of hyperabundant, introduced, hybridized subspecies of Canada geese. So in the early 1900s, Canada geese, or subspecies non-native to Vancouver Island and non-migratory, were introduced as a kind of gaming opportunity.
Gaming meaning they would be hunted.
They could be hunted,
Yeah.
raised and hunted. And after a time, they were kind of released into the wild and they hybridized with each other. A couple different subspecies were brought over. And it created this kind of hyperabundant, non-migratory hybridized subspecies.
Because we're all used to seeing the migration, the kind of wings
Yeah, absolutely.
flying next to the plane,
Yeah.
going across the country.
So we do
type of
have
thing.
a migratory subspecies that does migrate and has a kind of a controlled population that moves across the landscape. But we also have this non-migratory subspecies that kind of sticks around and wreaks havoc with its large population on things like farms, golf courses, schools, anything with big open fields tends to be they're a menace to. They're kind of grazing a lot of our vegetation, whether it's a commercial crop or a naturally important species, right down to the dirt and the mud, which causes and often facilitates a lot of erosion, which mixed with that kind of added nutrients of their feces can really change the nutrient equation of a lot of different areas.
And so when that nutrient situation in the water, in the soil is different, that makes it harder for the species that were adapted to how it had been?
Potentially, yes, but it's mainly just that grazing pressure and eating down again to that soil level. And in marsh systems here, like tidal salt marshes, what we see is once it's kind of grazed down to the soil, we start seeing that erosion and loss of the marsh platform. So that vegetated area that's built up over time, they graze that down. The tides, the flows of water eat away at that and remove it, and that system is lost. So what's left of this really important ecosystem is now being further kind of damaged and impacted by these hyperabundant populations of Canada geese.
Yeah, so tell us what you did to try and keep them out, basically.
Sure. So many different methods have been developed and trialed and experimented with. Anything from shooting laser pointers at these geese, all the way up to kind of formal fencing with, typically plastic fencing and things like that. We were introduced to this method by a group up island, the Guardians of our Salish Estuaries, which basically looks at using natural materials to build a deterrent. So it's not completely excluding Canada geese out of these systems, but it is deterring them from getting those really large numbers.
And it's essentially a fence.
Yeah.
But the geese are bigger than most of the other bird species around here, most of the species that would typically use this area, and they just can't get through the gate, right?
Yeah, that's right. So it's quite selective to Canada geese. Like you mentioned, Canada geese really like these larger runways. They get quite claustrophobic. So having structures around can kind of make them more wary of potential predation, and maybe deter them from using a site as much. It also kind of blocks them swimming when they've lost their feathers in the middle of summer. They lose their feathers and molt, lose the flight, and so they take to water to swim right at the peak kind of sensitivity of all this marsh vegetation coming in into full growth, and they take advantage of that and really graze in these kind of safe, open estuarine environments.
Yeah, and so by removing their ability when they can't fly, or limiting their runway when they can fly to swoop down in here, and limiting their water access when they can't fly, you're essentially kind of soft excluding them from this certain area.
Yeah, absolutely. So initially what we saw at these systems was that overgrazing. So a lot of the marsh, what should have been, marsh and vegetated marsh platform, was eroded down to mud and was sliding away and slipping away and turning to mudflat, anoxic mudflat.
Anoxic meaning it doesn't have
just very
oxygen.
Yeah, not a lot of oxygen, not conducive to plant growth and establishment, or much life at all. So not a lot of invertebrate communities, invertebrate communities living inside of those sediments, things like clams or anything like that. So step one was to exclude that pressure. So the fencing was constructed to try to give those chances an area to recover, those areas a chance to recover on their own passively, which we did see, which was really encouraging to see that there was some ability for nature to respond on its own. And this process, left alone, will continue, but over a very long time period. It'll take a long time period for that drainage infrastructure to reestablish and those marsh communities to come back. So we're trialing different methods of restoration to try to accelerate that recovery. One such method is habitat creation. So here at Veer Royal Park, we've actually worked with partners to excavate some fallow field area to allow that flooding and marsh establishment to occur in areas where it wasn't previously. The other thing we're doing is using the spoils from those excavation projects and extending the marsh platform back out and encouraging that growth by amending the elevations of the platform as
so
well as
that means
the
you're
sediments.
taking the material, the soil that you've dug up over here, you're putting it over there, and you make that lower to facilitate the marsh, but you make that higher to facilitate.
That's right. That's right. So we're just hitting the target elevations for these species, plant species, to grow, and the necessary kind of soil requirements that are required. So in the upper landscape, we're lowering it down to allow the water to return and inundate that area. And at the riverway or the seaward edge, we're putting that material down to raise that platform up to the elevation where plants can grow.
All right, well, let's take a closer look at it.
Sure. So phase one was to establish the ecocultural fencing around the perimeter of our marsh area. And about 5 or 6 of these areas were fenced off throughout the Craigflower Estuary in Veer Royal Park with our different volunteers and partners. Phase two included establishing what are these kind of pilot segments here. You can see these small, almost 1 by 2 meter boxes where we essentially piloted the treatment of raising up the mudflat up to an elevation conducive for plant growth. Once we could see that the plants we planted in these areas with the different soil mixtures were successful, we were a little bit more confident to expand our treatment. So when we came in for phase 3 to basically excavate the soils of this upland fallow field and allow tidal inundation to return, thereby creating some marsh habitat upland and planting the marine riparian around it, as well as carving these nice dendritic channels to allow connectivity for aquatic species to make their way up and utilize that habitat.
And this, like, it just kind of, it's muddy. It's you'd find this lots of places, but until you had adjusted it, it was more like up the hill there. It was more that kind of field or grassy.
Absolutely, yeah. And we've since introduced a number, 20 to 30 native species of shrubs and trees, thousands of plants planted by volunteers going into the riparian area. So we took what was, a pretty homogeneous or, one or two kind of introduced grass species and turned it back and provided the conditions by planting many, many different native plant species to restore to something, in 50 years, but will look much more like the forest we see surrounding us here.
And that would be areas kind of like here where we've got shrubs, we've got trees, we've got different vegetation on the ground.
Absolutely.
We've got hedges, we've got all kinds of different things versus, say, we've maybe just got some grasses a bit further on the other side of that fence into the more pedestrian part of the park.
That's right. So, and providing all sorts of habitat for different species of birds and wildlife, insects, and creating the connectivity between kind of this upland area and the species living and thriving in the aquatic environment as well. So, and so we took a lot of those sediments and things that we needed to remove in order to create the conditions for flooding upland, and we placed them similar to what we did in our pilot with these small boxes here, placed them on the marsh in order to get the elevations back up to a place where vegetation can grow. And so we've kind of accelerated that recovery timescale by amending the soils and raising them to the elevation. It should be mentioned that, these habitats, these small dendritic channels and wetland habitats are really important for rearing juvenile fish, including salmon, like rearing juvenile coho in this system in particular. As they kind of are heading their way out to the ocean in the spring, juvenile salmon will be utilizing these marsh platforms through these dendritic channel systems to kind of escape predation, high flows of the main channel, but also look for food, all of the different insects and nutrients that exist in these kind of marsh communities.
Because this is kind of an area where you have the salt water, the ocean water mingling into kind of our land-based streams and estuaries and lakes and things. Is that right?
Absolutely. And that's where that productivity comes from, the mixing of all those different nutrients from fresh water and salt water and land, all of those systems meeting together, mixing. And that's really where we see a lot of this primary productivity happening and a lot of the resultant biodiversity.
So as you've seen, we've had weather up and down today. It's sunny right now. It was raining probably 2-3 minutes ago. But that's given us the chance to see this habitat in all kinds of different lights. Literally, the light has changed. We're seeing how water flows as it falls down and comes into the system. What are you getting to kind of see at this time of year generally about how a lot of these habitats are functioning? We talked about fish coming back. What else are we seeing at this part of the year in a lot of these areas that you folks look at?
Yeah, it's a good time. I mean, it's kind of the time when a lot of these plants go to sleep for the year, so to speak. So they're putting a lot of their energy from their foliage back down into their roots, which is traditionally a time to harvest a lot of these species for their bulbs and things like that. So, working with local First Nations on the coast, they've been kind of amending elevations and basically managing these systems for since time immemorial as root gardens. So these are actually really productive areas for things like rice root, silverweed, different species of salt marsh species and tidal marsh species that were edible and were managed by First Nations as gardens. So we're not the first ones to try to extend this area, this ecosystem, and try to manage it. And we're happy to try to work with local First Nation partners and in trying to learn from each other and develop this work.
Yeah. How have you seen over your time with the organization how the work and the org itself has developed?
First Nations in particular?
I meant in general, but speak to that too if you like.
The work itself, I think It's evolved in terms of it's becoming a lot more active, I think. Like, I think we're getting a lot more ambitious with our efforts. I think there's been a lot of the work over the years to try to do this. And I think a lot of this is not reinventing the wheel and looking to kind of past efforts, whether it be in restoration from a Western lens or management from a more traditional First Nations lens. And so to try to take those lessons that have been learned in the past and continue to apply them seems to be what we're doing. But the restoration economy itself is growing, and it seems like there's a lot more resources as awareness of the benefits of these systems continues to grow. And we look for more nature-based solutions to things like climate action. These systems are really great at sequestering carbon. To sea level rise and storm surge increases, these systems are incredible at buffering those impacts, providing shelter for local residences and upland infrastructure, and provides a resilience to those sorts of stressors. And also, other things that we're still learning about, like their ability to filter water in the system. So, if we increase the vegetation and kind of enhance that system, what kind of downstream effects are we having? Are we able
literally downstream?
Literally downstream effects. We can hear the highway in the background. The thousands.
We're only a 10-minute walk that I just took now from one of the main highways through the region. We're not far past even the interchange.
Yeah.
In kind of to get to the West Shore, essentially.
Absolutely.
So this is quite an urbanized area that we're in, or a suburban area at least. And yet we're still able to kind of see some of these corridors and these park areas that do still exist amid all that, but can maybe be fleshed out or restored to a state they might have been prior to a lot of this influence.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think for our organization, that's a focus we're definitely taking, is not only what can we do in the system itself, but how do we kind of buffer the impacts outside the system and take this kind of watershed approach, or larger kind of scale regional approach to the impact and address these things at their source. So working with partners like the Ministry of Transportation to try to control stormwater pollution on site, and working with local residents about how what they do on the landscape is directly connected to systems like these through the hydrology of living in a rainforest, or having stormwater systems connect us all to systems like this.
Yeah, and you mentioned, of course, the growing kind of interest in doing this work, more and more organizations doing it, in some cases more funding for it, or more awareness by different levels of government of its importance of this type of work. I know that in the past I've talked to the Green Team, for instance, and volunteers with it, about something that you mentioned a moment ago, which is kind of what can we do individually in terms of climate change prevention and mitigation of the effects that we already anticipate. And that's such a big problem. We even see kind of this idea maybe in politics that, Canada's role is not big in it, which I think speaks to people's desire to retreat from having to conceptualize how big that problem is. And some people do that retreat in such a way where they ignore these climate issues, just don't worry about it, it's not my problem, etc. But we also see people that are very invested in caring about it, overwhelmed in their lives. Dread kind of suffuses their look into the future because they know the scope of what is very likely coming. But a lot of those same people, I think, have found that I've talked to, or that people in organizations like yours will mention to me, is that when you can get out there, when you can be a part of seeing something change, seeing some of these effects be reversed, that tackles the emotional, the mental, the communal aspect of how humans grapple with this kind of thing. Is that kind of what you're saying you've found in these projects?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we really pride ourselves on our volunteers and being able to ensure that the time that they give to projects like these and to initiatives like these isn't for waste. So trying to make these impacts meaningful and effective is a really big part of kind of our job for that, and facilitating that work. And we do see that. We see people coming down and really feeling empowered about what they're doing, feeling like they're part of the solution. And, maybe there's some setbacks, and every plant that you plant may not survive, but overall they can see this kind of movement towards doing something.
It's tangible.
It's tangible, making something better. And if we can get a little bit of that and get people's hands on these ecosystems, get them out doing this kind of stuff, particularly the younger generations, and connected with people in their community who are like-minded across all those different disciplines and perspectives and socioeconomic backgrounds, then we're doing our job, and I think we're creating a much more resilient community and landscape, social landscape, for resiliency to those stressors.
Are there certain things people should look for, certain practices that are maybe particular to how to care for streams or areas that might be in the park near their house? What should people, if not maybe do something specific? They can join groups like this and help for those tangible acts, but what can they be mindful of in the everyday that is going to make things a little bit better or a little bit worse?
I think, just educating yourself on some of these things. I think there's a lot of information out there. Like you said, joining a group, but also following some of these groups that are putting out a lot of really good educational material that can really help inform you as a consumer or even just a participant in daily life. And those things matter, I think, and I think that's a really good way to get involved, is just learning a little bit more about these systems, about these people, about these different initiatives and what people can do. So there's any number of things we can do in our daily lives, and to try to do all of them, I think, is overwhelming and a little bit stressful. But
you can identify
one
two
thing,
or three,
get
and you
started.
build it up.
Yeah.
Well, it's great that you folks put it on, and it's great as well, of course, that you took the time for us today with all this busy scheduling and all different places that need this type of help and support. So thank you for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been Kyle with the Peninsula Streams Society. We were here in View Royal Park today, looking at some of the restoration they've done after some nasty Canada geese got the run of the place for quite a while. And for Island Sound and Story, I'm Cam, and we'll see you next time.